Not much progress the last couple of days. Raining today, so can't really do much outside here. Yesterday I kind of took a sick day. I didn't feel very good. Had a splitting headache. My wife thought maybe I had the flu. She'd had the flu for 3 or 4 days with a headache and some other symptoms, but I just basically had the headache and eyeballs hurt. I kind of suspected I fried my noggin in the sun day before yesterday. I did get my bald head sunburned when I got so warm that I took my hat off, and I noticed at the end of the day that little toasty on top there. Anyway, I think that's what happened. I got a little bit too much sun. I don't know whether overheated or just from the reflection of all the sunshine off of that metal out there working on that float. Could have been either, could have been both. Well, anyway, I wasn't much good for anything yesterday, so I didn't try to do anything. I did get the parts painted, got them all drilled out and set up the day before, and I got them out yesterday morning and mixed up some paint, got those cleaned up, aluma-prepped them and alidined them and hung them up to dry, and got them coated with a coat of zinc chromate primer. But that's about all I could do yesterday. And it was too bad. My wife had the day off yesterday and we're all primed to drive some nails, but didn't get that done. And then today it was raining, and of course she had some meetings and stuff to go to. She had to go entertain a potential pastor's wife. They had a lunch meeting for that, and then she's got another meeting for her rose mauling club this afternoon. Needs to get some stuff cleaned up and straightened out and try to get organized again, and I've got all of those parts and pieces that I took off of the floats that need to be cleaned up and assessed and repainted and get them ready to reinstall so I can get that done. Well, I got a pile of parts here off those floats that all need to be cleaned up and repainted and powder coated or whatever I do with them, and get them ready to install once I get those floats ready to put back together. So this over here in this pile is mostly the stuff off of the Cub. That pile over there is off of the 172 stuff, off of the newer floats. There, leaning up against the door, are the spreader bars. The ones on the right are off of the Cub floats, and the ones on the left are off of the floats off the 172, but they're both identical. The ones off of the Cub are serviceable. The front one is in pretty good shape. The rear one has some pits in it in the tube. Castings on the end are in good shape. I pulled that all apart a few years ago and cleaned that all up and greased those up and repainted them and stuff and put them in. But the ones off of the 172 floats are in real good shape. One of the things I've got to look at closely is these water rudders. The ones leaning up against the door over there off of the Cub floats, and the ones laying down here on the floor off the 172. And the ones off the 172 are actually in worse shape than the ones off the Cub. One of them has got a pretty good bend in it. Those brackets that are bent there that attach the blade of the water rudder to the post, those are really thin on these new water rudders. The old ones are a lot thicker material, a lot better quality material. So anyway, I need to take those water rudders apart, both of them, and clean them up. Those are so expensive that it's worth having both of them cleaned up and ready to go. Now there's wire pulls on there like this, and I don't know how different those are between the 172 and the Supercub attach fittings, so I'll go over those. The ones for the diagonal cross wires between the floats, between the spreader bars, should be the same, but I'll get those all cleaned up and repainted. And then we've got the castings that fit on the floats and on the fuselage. Those are all completely different, and the struts that attach the floats to the airplane are all completely different. So I'll get all those cleaned up. Now these eye bolts right here are an Edo proprietary item. They're a proprietary bolt, and these are kind of rusty, but those things are, I don't know, I looked here a few years ago and I think they're like 50 or 80 bucks a piece or something like that. So I've got a bunch of those off of both floats, and I need to clean those up. So I need to take all this stuff apart and get this stuff cleaned up. You know, this bracket right here for this water rudder pulley looks like it's corroded there. I don't know, I'll have to see. Some of these are folded aluminum and some of them are stainless steel, so I'll have to get those. Anyway, I have to go through all of those stuff between the two floats and get them all cleaned up and see, mix and match them as to what'll fit, and see what I can use for spares on the Cub floats and what I can sell to somebody with a 172. I've already gone through all the hardware, all the nuts and bolts, and ordered new hardware for the stuff that I either didn't have in stock or was not good off of the airplane. So all of that, I've got some of it from Aircraft Spruce already, some of it is on back order. So anyway, when that stuff comes in, we'll have the hardware to put it back together. We just need to get all the parts cleaned up and ready. I got a bunch of the stuff cleaned up and threw in my stew pot, the solvent tank, solvent pot there to get the peralkatone and stuff off of them. I was working on these flying wires, trying to get the ends off of those. I knew some of them weren't in very good shape, but some of them are salvageable. So I got the ones off of the diagonal flying wires for the floats. Those came off pretty good. And the ones on the front of the fuselage, the airplane diagonals, those came out okay. But the bottom ones, or a couple of them there on these rear flying wires, I had a heck of a time with. I sprayed them and let them soak, and I turned them, and I could get them to turn a little ways, and then they'd get down into the barrel and they'd seize up, and I'd turn them back out again and spray them with PB Blaster. And I tried heating them up with a torch. Well, that didn't work, and I went to the extreme measure of getting an old birthday candle and heating that so the wax melted down through into them. That sometimes will work when nothing else will. Some paraffin, candle wax, something like that. That'll creep right down the threads on pretty nasty stuff, but even that didn't work. So what I wound up doing, this is the terminal end here, one of them, and I put it in the vise and then took the Dremel tool and cut slits all the way around it, 4 or 5 every 1/4 inch or so, all the way around it. I didn't go all the way down to the threads, but I went as close to them as I dared, and then put it in the vise and turned it out, and I was able to get that one to come out. Threads on it are a little bit, I think that's just material out of this thing that was welded into the threads on that. The other one was worse. I was able to get it out, mangled it up pretty good, but it's got a lot of material. I don't know whether those threads are salvageable or not. I think I have a left-handed 1/4 inch 28 die someplace. I'll go see if I can dig it out and see if I can salvage the threads on this flying wire or not. And of course the terminal ends are no good. I knew that going into it, and I'd ordered new terminal ends, so those two go in the junk pile. When I got that much done anyway, I got those wires cleaned up to where they can be inspected, and that took a whole lot longer than it should have, but it's done now. I'm a little heady right now. I've been standing over this solvent bucket here for a couple hours now, cleaning all these parts up and washing them down. I got all the parts done that I had dumped in there. I took all the parts off of the old floats and threw them in there the other day to get them a chance to soak, to loosen up that peralkatone. And then I took some of the parts off of the new floats and threw in there just to kind of clean them up a little bit. Now the good news is that almost all of the parts off the old floats are serviceable just the way they are. I thought maybe once I got them cleaned up I'd have to sandblast them, strip the paint off them and stuff, and powder coat them. But I've only found a couple of parts on there that need to be sandblasted and painted. Water rudder posts are actually in good shape. I'll probably go ahead and sandblast those and repowder coat them anyway. They've got a little rust in a couple spots on them, but they're actually serviceable the way they are. They're actually in pretty good shape. The one step, the fueling step that come off of the left float has rust on it. That needs to be done. The right one off the right side, surprisingly, is just fine. I've had to redo those almost every year, but the one is in good shape. The other one needs to be cleaned up and painted. Most of the hardware that came out of the old floats is good shape, good enough to reuse. There's some of it that the CAD plating is worn on it a little bit that I probably wouldn't reuse, but it's perfectly serviceable. And then there's some of the nuts, of course most of the lock nuts, fiber lock nuts, I usually change those anyway, but they're good as long as they still tension down and tighten down. But quite a few of those had a little bit of rust showing on them. Now the bad news is that most of that stuff that came off of the new floats, most of it is okay. Those side plates are okay, but the they need to be powder coated. They need to be sandblasted to check them for sure, and powder coated. The wire pulls on those are all need to be cleaned up and redone. The water rudders are nasty. The posts are bad on the bottom of them. They're real rusty. And the water rudders, the little ears that come off of the blades on those are thinner than the ones that were on the old water rudders. And they were worn through where they pivot on the water rudder posts. Somebody had put a doubler on there, and that's why, is because those ears there were worn through. And one of them was really bent pretty bad, bent up pretty bad. The water rudder was way out of shape. And the ear broke off of it while I was trying to get the bolt out. The bolt was froze in. The pivot bolt that goes in through the water rudder post that the water rudders pivot on was froze up in there, and I couldn't get it out. And when I finally got it out, it broke the ear off of the one water rudder. So fortunately, my water rudders are in good shape. I've got a little bit of corrosion around one blade where the bolt goes through there for the retract cable attachment, but otherwise they're in good shape. So I'm going to sandblast those and powder coat those, and I went over all of the struts and cleaned them up. They're all serviceable. There's a couple of them got some pits in them and stuff, but they're serviceable the way they are. They can go back on. And of course all of the blocks and stuff are in real good shape. I don't need to do anything with the attached blocks at all. They're fine just the way they are. And my granddaughter came over today to help out a little bit, and she's been working on the floats, cleaning the inside of those out. Whatever she does is something I don't have to do. She's saving me several hours of work right there, just vacuuming the floats out and getting the crud out of them that's in there. And I just sent her off to go get some lunch, and hopefully when she comes back she'll be able to do a little bit more work on there. But whatever she does is something I don't have to do, so that's good. Let's see if the biscuits are done. Ah, there we go. And most of those parts off of the old floats were actually in pretty good shape. There was a few pieces that needed to be worked over that had been rusted a little bit, but most of the parts on the new floats were not in as pretty a shape. Some of them aren't too bad. They just need to be cleaned up and painted. So I put a bunch of parts in the sandblaster and spent yesterday cleaning them up, getting them all sandblasted down and nice and bright and shiny again. And then these pieces here are the steel pieces. These are the wire pulls. Well, that's one water rudder post right there, but the rest of them are parts of the wire pulls. Those are all steel. So I got those all sandblasted and cleaned up, and then I sprayed them with high zinc corrosion proof primer, and then a coat of gray, machinery gray over the top of that. So those are all done, ready to go back into service. Well, I did all of them. I did the ones that came off the 172 floats as well as the ones off the old floats. Well, I did only 3 or 4 of them off the old floats, or 3 of them. See, some of the ones like this off the old float, it was pretty pitted, but it was actually in pretty good shape. It only had rust in a couple of little spots on it, or a couple of them, but it was enough that I decided to go ahead and clean them all up anyway. So I can take those out and save those up until we get ready to put it all back together. The other parts that I sandblasted are all aluminum parts, parts and pieces. Most of them are off of the new floats, but they're all aluminum, so they're going to take a little bit more work. I'm going to dip those in the Alumiprep first and brighten them up, and then allodyne them before I paint them. So they're going to take some more work, but it's a nice day today. I think I'll work on the floats today if I can talk my wife into driving nails. We got done with those patches on the floats in time. Sealant that we put on there got us started getting sealed up, and I put a coat of zinc chromate primer on everything, and it got set up before it started raining. Anyway, it's been too wet to do any of the other things that I wanted to do on the floats for now, so I've been working on these float pieces here. I've got them pretty well cleaned up. I got the water rudders posts, both mine and the new ones, both the old ones and the new ones, sandblasted down, nice bright shiny, and powder coated. And then I got all of the pieces off of the new floats Well, this is off the old floats here. This is a step. That was the other step on the other side was in good shape. This one was rusty, that I got it cleaned up and powder coated. And then all of these parts here are all off of the new floats, and these are the attach gear for the 172. These are the plugs that go in to the gear attachments, and then these are the attachments that go onto the floats, and these are the plates that go on the where the spreader bar is attached to the floats here, and these are all off of the new floats. So anyway, I got those parts all cleaned up, sandblasted them. The wire pulls here, I took the ones that were still functional. I cleaned those all up, and then I've got these eye bolts here that come off the floats, that these brackets here for the little pulleys for the water rudder controls go into. I got those all cleaned up, and I got everything all powder coated. Anyway, all of these parts look good. These parts actually, the blocks and stuff, the attach fittings here for the 172 stuff was actually in really good shape. The water rudder, the ones off the new floats, these posts were kind of pretty rough, and they cleaned up nice. And of course then my old ones, they're getting pretty well worn, but they cleaned up nice. They actually didn't need much on them. They were rusty here around the tops where this clamp goes. There's a fair lead that goes through here that the retract cable for the water rudders go through, and that was rusty on both of them and pitted, but I got those cleaned up. I went over the whole water rudders post and cleaned those up. My old water rudders off the old floats, I just got done with those. They were a heck of a job to get sandblasted. That powder coat is a pain to get off. You have to work at every square inch, every square millimeter, whatever of it. They were hard. Well, I finally got them all bright and shiny, and I hung them up outside and just sprayed them with some zinc chromate primer. I'm going to have to get my big oven, the oven that I built for powder coating. I'm going to have to put it together and get it hooked up. I've powder coated those before and done them in my little oven, but it's not much fun. It doesn't work very well, so I'll get the big oven going for those. The water rudders off of the new floats, they're in pretty bad shape, so they're actually in worse shape than the old ones. So the blades are in good shape, but the little ears on them for the retract pivots on them are not in very good shape, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. So that's most of the attach fittings and the hardware and stuff for the floats all cleaned up and done. And the flying wires, I've got some rethreading dies to use on the threads on those, on the ones that the threads were kind of boogered up on, and see if I can salvage those. I think it was just the metal from galling coming off from those wire pull or those eyes on there that is in that, but they're left-handed threads and I didn't have anything to clean them up with, so I want to see if I can get those cleaned up and salvage those, and if not, I'll have to order some new ones.